lots of potential for reasons why you might want to consider the colon in your treatment plan. So, with that said, let's talk about treatment. So, it's a tube, and I've probably said on many podcasts and many teachings that when we have tubes love to be stretched. So, this is why I spent so much time talking about the attachments of the colon to the pelvis, the colon to the diaphragm, the colon to the posterior abdominal wall, the anterior abdominal wall, because understanding those attachments is going to make sense for you of how to stretch it. And then the other thing to note is that the ascending and descending parts of the colon, so the lateral borders of that frame, they are the least mobile parts of the colon. And the mobility that they do have is going to be rotational around the axis of the tube, as well as shear, medial lateral shear. And if you get an idea of the 3D-ness of it, you should start to see like, oh, all the ways that we could potentially stretch it. The other thing to think about when we have a structure that's kind of like a tube, and I'm like, is there something in my office? So if you have a tube like this, what's one way that we could stretch it? By just fulcruming it in the center, right? So if these two things are fixed, if we fulcrum it, right? If we fulcrum it from the center, it starts to stretch it out. So you can use props to create a fulcrum like that. The most easy prop to use is like a quarters ball or a towel roll or a bolster, and do that on the side of your body where the ascending and descending colon is. Then once you have a stretch there on that part, then you can take the more fixed points of the flexures or where it connects into the pelvis, and you can move those in relationship around it, which is basically like trunk rotation or pelvic rotation, to create more of a stretch on the tube. Because remember, those tubes live on sort of already oblique lines. So we want to add more oblique line stretching, which is rotation. So rolling patterns are really good for the colon as well. The nice thing is as we roll over our body on our side, we get a little bit of that medial shear to the colon itself. The other thing that you can do is use the diaphragm and the relationship to the organs to use your breath as a directed way to facilitate even more movement. And so the easiest way to think about it is when you take an inhale breath, right? The diaphragm drops down and the organs have to drop down too. And then they also go out to the sides. And so you can really facilitate that rotation, external rotation and lateral shear of the sides of your colon with an inhale breath. With that said, you can do that in that sideline position that we talked about. It's going to be not the side that's being fulcrumed that you're going to facilitate that lateralness, but probably the upper side if you're laying on your side, right? If I'm laying on the quarters ball on my right, I'm facilitating medial shear with the ball. So my breath is going to allow for that lateral movement, lateral external rotation on the left versus it on the right. So then you would flip over. Also, use the pelvis in this sense. So remember though that the left pelvis has like a stronger relationship to the colon than the right pelvis does. The right pelvis does a little bit. I'm not saying you can't use it at all. It's just I wouldn't be surprised if when you're doing stuff related to right hip extension or right rotation of the pelvis, you feel less of a stretch sensation of the tube because it just doesn't anchor down into the pelvis quite like the sigmoid colon does. A real easy way you can already feel this is take your left leg and bring it behind you, and it's like a hip flexor stance position. It can be standing or it can be kneeling, doesn't really matter, just as long as the hip is an extension. So here's the key too. We need the pelvis to move into extension too. So we need to allow the pelvis to anteriorly tilt. So this is not maintaining a posterior tilt. This is not, do not confuse this with a hip flexor stretch, though it might feel like a hip flexor stretch, which is then information to you of like, have I been stretching my hip flexor or my colon? Depends on your lens of view, right? So let the leg be behind you, let the pelvis be in anterior tilt, and then think about the obliqueness of that tube. It's already going more posterior on the right now because it's going posterior on the upper part on the left, and now you've taken the bottom part and you've brought it more posterior, it might feel like a stretch already without adding anything else. But if we want to increase it, we can move it away by side bending. We can move it more posterior, or we can move it anterior, though for me, I don't feel it, right? More posterior is the way. And then we're going to use our breath. We're going to take an inhale breath and picture in our mind's eye the tube on the side of our trunk going out as we breathe in. And for me, I can feel exactly on the tube where I have the most restriction, which is about halfway down the tube, where it likely starts to attach with the mesenteric root right around that same thing. And that's what I'm feeling. So maybe then, knowing that, maybe I'm like, okay, I'm going to respond really well then to lying on a gorgeous ball on that side, bringing those two pieces together and letting them stretch out. And then I might go back to this. Or I might just be in this position and breathe for a little bit. See if I can mobilize it. Maybe I take my hand and grab the loops of my intestine, the mesenteric root. So that's nice. That's another Joe, link that in the show notes because you might not know what I'm talking about unless you listen to that episode. And then see if you can get a little bit more left rotation or a little bit more side bending, right? Every exhale, can you take up the slack of what that inhale stretch created? You can do that on the right side, but remember, because there's less of that in the bowl of the pelvis, we might not feel the same sensation. Right legs and hip extension. And if I go into trunk rotation, I don't feel a ton of stretch to the colon itself. I just feel a big groin stretch on that side. So I'm going to pick something else. I'm going to take the hepatic flexor away by side bending to the left. Now I feel it in my colon a little bit more. And then maybe I can add the rotation. And funny, I have to add rotation and flexion to get here. And then I can use my breath, taking an inhale. And imagine that tube going out to the side. Man, that feels really good. So again, allowing yourself to know where the anatomy is gives yourself permission to change the movement in the body to have a different experience. It's not the positions of the movement that matters. It's to feel like you're stretching the right structure. So if my goal is to stretch the tube, I should be feeling it in the tube, not just the hip flexor, not just the groin, not just my side, right? It's not just an oblique stretch. I had to find a very specific position, but I picked those positions knowing about the connections of the body.